And we are live. So, good morning, everyone. I am here with Dr. Michelle Natinsky. She's a licensed psychologist that I got a chance to get connected with here recently and wanted to bring her on because I know early on in the lockdown and pandemic and stuff, was able to talk with a few different psychologists and different people from that standpoint when we were first trying to figure out how all of this was affecting us. But again, now almost a year later, which is hard to believe, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of get refreshed and updated because there's still a lot of things that are very real for a lot of people from that standpoint. I thought she'd be a great guest to have. So I really appreciate you joining today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So first off, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your origin story? Like, are you an original Austinite, or like most of us, did you live somewhere else and kind of moved here? And what's your background?
Yeah, I'm delighted to. So, I am not a native Austinite. I came actually to Austin for graduate school in the 90s, mid 90s, and have been here since. So, I have really watched Austin grow and change. Um, So I'm a child and school psychologist by training. Earlier in my career, I worked in public schools. I worked in community mental health in residential treatment facilities, really supporting kids and adolescents. And peripherally, the grown-ups that belong with them. So parents, teachers, administrators. Currently, I have a private practice here in Austin, and I'm no longer working directly with kids and adolescents. Instead, my focus is to support, again, the adults who have relationships with kids. So, to the larger extent, that's parents. And then I also do some work with teachers in the form of professional development. So, my goal or my mission is really to provide skills and strategies to these adults so that they can build positive, emotionally connected relationships with the kids in their lives, whether that's their own children that they're parenting or their students in their classroom. So it is such a fun model to be able to provide sort of that consultative approach and really empower people to then really have the kinds of relationships with the kids in their lives that they want.
Very cool.
That's yeah.
So where are you originally from then?
So I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. So next door, I guess I like to
Yeah.
say. And it was a really fun place to grow up. I didn't really realize until I left New Orleans that I thought all cities had as much kind of culture and uniqueness as New Orleans did. Didn't quite realize that until I moved around, but I think I found a little bit of that in Austin because I have really enjoyed living here, and my husband and I chose to raise our kids here and have a family, and really plan to be here for the duration. So, yeah, New Orleans is the origin, but been in Austin now a good while.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, there's Austin's, I think, a cool city because it is kind of such a melting pot of different people. Obviously, we get a lot of snowbirds like myself,
Mhm.
who did it long, made sure to do it long before I retired. But it's always an interesting mix of people from that standpoint. So, what kind of, obviously, you went to something you went to school for. This isn't like a second career. What, as a kid growing up, what kind of made you think that you wanted to be a psychologist?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. When I think back to who I was as a little kid, it's very clear to see sort of the characteristics that I demonstrated as a kid, how they have played out as an adult. I was very early on a teacher. I was often found, like I think in second grade, I was found teaching kindergartners how to read in a corner of a classroom somewhere. So I've always kind of had that helper personality, specifically around teaching and instruction. And so it's not a huge stretch to think about the work that I do is really a form of teaching. So I actually am one of those rare psychology majors in undergrad who actually intended to use her psychology degree. It was very, very planful. And I've always sort of had one foot in education and one foot in psychology. So when I found school psychology as a specialty, it just really clicked and it made sense. And it has just brought me so much fulfillment and joy. My husband often reminds me that the way that I talk about my work, that not everyone is as lucky to feel the way
Sure.
that I feel about my work. It really is just delightful every day, every day. And there's so much variety, which I think keeps it fresh. Every family, every parent or teacher that I work with just brings their own unique universe to it. And so there's no 2 days are alike, no two clients are alike. And that I think is fun. I kind of like the challenge of that.
Yeah. Ironically, that's one of the things that I love about being in real estate is, right, no two clients that you help
Same
are the
thing.
same. No two properties that you help someone buy or sell are the same. And there's definitely, I mean, I think in more things than we realize, there's an element of psychology as well too. But a lot of times it may just be our own internal psychology. But again, with anytime you're doing a client-based types of service like this, you're having to kind of understand that psychology of what is stressing someone out or why are they making those decisions to some
For
degree, and talk
sure.
people through it. And so, yeah, psychology has always been uh, an interesting subject for me as well too. Although I never took more than the Psych 101, so I can't.
Well, Psych 101 is ironically the worst psychology class of
Yeah,
all time. And it's often designed to weed people out. And it certainly does, because it's usually not the most compelling curriculum. But for those of us who knew we wanted it for the long haul,
sure.
it's just part of it.
Part of it. Nice. And like I say, it's awesome that you actually, like, say that you get to have a career and job that you enjoy and love so much, right? Like that's honestly um, the ideal, I think, for most people. Whether, again, not that it has to be psychology, but whatever that is, that you get to wake
Mhm.
up and you're happy that you get to go to work, or even excited that you get to go to work, versus looking at the clock, dreading when you get to punch out and when you get to get home and when you get to have your weekends and vacations and stuff from that standpoint. So that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I'm grateful.
So what you mentioned that initially early on, you were working in some different system schools and
Mhm.
different things from that standpoint. What kind of led you to want to branch out and
Mhm.
start your own practice?
That is a great question. And it's one that was actually really planful. So when I worked in schools, it was before I had kids of my own. I'm a mom now, and I have an eighth grader and a sixth grader. Um, my clients tell me that I have street cred because of this, because I'm parenting right alongside them and having to make the same decisions and struggling with the same challenges. And, um, you know, just they can tell in the things that I say that I'm walking the walk, right? And not that our kids are the same, because our kids are unique and
Sure.
have different challenges, but that I guess the examples that I use really resonate for people. And I think it makes it real and accessible for that reason. So earlier in my career, I worked in schools. And loved my time in schools. I adore teachers. I think they are superheroes and should have capes to wear every day, especially right now in the midst of a pandemic. And I really just love being in the place where kids hang out 8, 9 hours a day. However, when I became a mom, I wanted to be really involved in my kids' lives. And starting this private practice really kind of helped me accomplish two things. One is I've always been really drawn to working with parents and teachers. And so that allowed me to do that. But it also allowed me to have the flexibility to be an involved mom to my own kids. So there's a degree of flexibility that my private practice has afforded me. And I get a little irritated sometimes when people say, "Oh, you're so lucky that can have a part-time practice." And I have to point out that there's nothing, luck was not, it's not about luck, that I actually went to school for almost a decade. When other friends were out starting jobs and earning lots of money, I was earning lots of debt and getting a degree that would take a very long time. But I did so because I knew I wanted to be a mom one day and I wanted to have
Sure.
that flexibility in my work. And this is something I actually talk about with young women often as they're trying to craft their graduate programs and their career trajectories. I think it's something that isn't talked about as much in academia, right? But if you want to be a mental health professional, there are a variety of paths that you can take to get there. I happen to take the one that is the longest, most expensive, sort of really full of obstacles. But I knew that it was also the one that would afford me the most flexibility for later in my life. So it was not as much luck, it was planful and intentional. And I feel like I'm really reaping the benefits of that now. I have a really fulfilling practice and I'm really engaged in my kids' lives. And I feel like I'm able to be there for them and support them. Um, and so it feels like it's the best of both worlds.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, I mean, there, right. There's, and I couldn't tell you specifically who says it. I want to say it's like a Vince Lombardi saying that says something like you make your own luck. Right. So there are definitely instances in life where things go your way or, there's breaks that can happen from time to time. But in most cases,
Sure.
it's really putting in the hours, putting in the time, the dedication to do that, especially again, right. Like you say, even as a small business owner, yes, you theoretically can work part-time, whether you do or not, that I don't know. But in often cases, just because you're seeing clients only 4 to 6 hours a day doesn't mean you're doing 4 to 6 hours of work. So it's not, yeah, like
Never.
it's not the same. Again, you have also a fun parallel from real estate, right? Like that I have the fortune that it's really rare that someone needs to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and go take a look at a home. So I rarely have to deal with morning rush hour traffic, but you still have people that want to go see a home at 5 or 6 o'clock on a Thursday, and they let you know that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so you're like, oh well, those plans are now changed and stuff. So it's again a similar thing in the fact that you put in the hard work up front, and that tends to lead to better results and the stuff that people see that like, oh, again, so
Well,
lucky.
and yeah, and what's interesting about that is that often the work I'm doing with parents is, teaching them how to have strong, solid boundaries for themselves, how to teach their kids to have healthy boundaries. And so when I set those healthy boundaries as part of my practice, I'm actually modeling for my clients the very skills and lessons I'm trying to impart to them. So, when I say I have a hard stop at, 3 because I have to go pick my kids up from school, I'm sort of really modeling for them what boundaries look like. And I think that's a benefit. I'm told by my clients that it is helpful for them to see me practice those very
Sure.
same skills. So
And
it
that's one of
works.
the yeah, and that's one of the great benefits about like actual practice versus again, as much as I love teachers, both my parents graduated and became teachers originally. Like people that get kind of stuck in the academia field, it's about theory rather than practice sometimes. And so
Mhm.
that would be so again mentioning that you teach teachers to some degree. Have you had
Mhm.
other psychologists as clients and stuff from that standpoint? Because that would be not only are you teaching the teachers, but a psychologist teaching psychologists would be kind of an interesting
Yeah, I do.
dynamic.
I have definitely had clients that have been maybe not necessarily psychologists, but
Sure,
therapists or
sure,
in the
yeah,
mental health field, for sure. And it's a huge compliment when that happens because I think it's validation that there's safety and comfort and trust there. So for sure, yes, I have had that, and I have teaching experience as well, and that was something that served me really well when I was working in schools because when you're a teacher, and you're talking to a school psychologist who has never been a teacher, it shows. You can
Sure.
tell. But my teaching experience informed the way that I practiced as a school psychologist. And I think that that was something that was deeply appreciated. And I think it was why I had the trust of my teachers, my staff, and they knew that they could come to me and receive support that was grounded in their reality. So, and it's funny a minute ago, Troy, that you said, it's moving from theory to the practical. I literally just gave a presentation the other day it was through a school, but to a parent group about technology, which is a topic that I teach about frequently. How do we teach our kids tech management skills? So they're using all this technology in their lives, but how are they learning to balance it in a healthy way? How are they learning to use good judgment as digital citizens? So this is a topic that comes up in my one-on-one consultation, but I also teach a class about it. And I literally structured the talk for each point. It was like top 5 tips for teaching tech management. And I literally went from theory to practice. So I taught the concepts, and then I said, and here's how we do this in real life. So you're really hitting it. That's exactly how I practice and how I teach. And I think it's helpful. I think people, theory is great, but if it doesn't help me in my everyday life, it's not really useful.
Exactly. If it doesn't relate to me, if I can't put it into practice, then it's just theory. And unfortunately, sometimes theory gets entrenched where practicality is always changing, right? So that theory is the stuff that's been around for years or decades, and in reality, it doesn't need to be scrapped always, but sometimes it needs to be updated, right, from that standpoint. And so that's, again, also where that practicality, I feel like, comes in.
Well, you're right. And technology is actually a really good topic of that, because what I see every day in my practice is that parents are really experiencing a parallel process. They're trying to teach their kids how to manage technology while they're trying to learn that themselves. And when we look at other areas of parenting, we're teaching our kids to manage a lot of things. It's our responsibility to teach them to manage money, to manage their belongings, to manage their time, to manage their relationships. But if you're parenting in 2021, you also have to teach them how to manage technology. The sticky part is all those other areas that I mentioned previously. By the time we're adults, most of us have, we don't have it all figured out necessarily perfectly, but we've got some experience and some ideas about it. But technology is ever changing, right? There's always a new platform. There's always a new app, a new social media, new this, new that. And so the agility that's needed is tricky for us as adults, parents in particular. And then we're also trying to teach that at the same time to our kids. So it's a little bit unique in that way. And you can imagine it's a pretty popular topic.
Sure. Like I say, in most other things, our experience and knowledge is greater than our kids. And again, a lot of times in technology, you can hand my 2-year-old niece an iPad and she can figure out how to unlock it somehow and, get going with it. And where, sometimes we'll have difficulties with it from that standpoint.
I can officially say as the mother of, a teen and a tween, their technology skills have far outpaced me. And I consider myself to be somewhat on top of things. And so it's just, and so actually in the literature, there are some labels given to this where, people of my generation are called digital immigrants. So like we didn't grow up with it. We've had to kind of learn it as we've gone, but our kids are digital natives. They've never known a time without it. And so that's a little bit of the way that the literature talks about some of that gap. And, there's strategies for dealing with it for sure.
Yeah.
It's just a big part of parenting right now.
Exactly. I saw something recently that talked about teachers never have to get a kid in trouble for passing notes anymore, because no one passes a note anymore. Like,
No.
no one knows how to write a note anymore. It's all going to be text messages and stuff from that standpoint.
So true.
So very cool. With the teacher aspect of it. So again, I agree with you 100%. Teachers deserve deserve it all. Like, right. It is a challenging job and profession. As much as, because I know teachers and have some friends, it's fun to kind of give them a hard time sometimes about getting summers off and different things of that nature. But for most of us, I don't have any kids, but right, for most people that have kids, even those that don't, the thought of having 2 or 3 kids and how much of a challenge that is in our day, let alone suddenly having 20 for either the whole day if they're young, or 20 every hour for 6 different hours, and being able to navigate again all the stuff on top of the lessons, right? Because again, with different family situations, different learning styles, all those kind of things, it's pretty amazing what teachers are able to do from that standpoint, and why the good ones are amazing from that standpoint as well. So with that in mind, it's do you see that do you end up applying a lot of those same principles to teachers and parents, or are there things that are more unique to teachers from that standpoint at all, or is it kind of pretty similar?
I would say that most of it overlaps. I think what's unique for teachers is that as life becomes more stressful outside of the classroom, I think teachers over the last, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, have felt like they are responsible for so much more than just the instructional curricular aspect of being a teacher. And actually, what we're learning about the brain, brain science is giving us such a better, more clear picture of this idea of why it isn't just about the learning, right? Like, a brain has to be receptive to learning in order for that to unfold. And some of the situations that kids are bringing before they've even entered the classroom, their brains are in a reactive state, not a receptive state. They aren't ready to learn. And our teachers are equipped with some skills for dealing with that, but not always all of the skills that they need. And I think this is a little bit of something that's really changing and shifting, as years go by. And so it's an incredible opportunity to be able to share what we're learning about the brain with teachers so that they can adjust the way that they respond to kids. I would also say that I think teachers are seeing more kids that have greater intensity in their personalities than maybe in previous decades. They're just showing up with a lot of stuff going on. That could be environmental, that can be, genetic and biological to the individual. And so, we have to support our teachers. We have to give them the tools and the strategies they need to deal with what's coming through the door. And I think that that's changing, that has been changing over time. And that's just something that I really enjoy and look forward to that chance to do.
Sure. So I would kind of touch on it a little bit, but right, obviously when the pandemic and lockdowns and those kind of things started, and most schools went virtual for the end of last year, if not kind of cutting classes and stuff short, there was a lot of, hopefully, awareness. I guess I had awareness, not everyone's in different spaces from that standpoint, but awareness that this is great, but we still need some social interaction. We still need to get outside. As much as it's nice not to have to go into an office for work, like, you shouldn't be shut into your house for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week kind of thing. How are, now that things have opened back up to some degree, kids can go to school in a lot of cases and stuff. How has that shift affected teachers and parents from that standpoint? Are you seeing still people having a lot of the same psychological holdups, or not maybe holdups, but like psychological challenges that they
Challenges.
had at the start of the pandemic? Or even is it even possible that things, for some, I mean, obviously for some people they will have, but that things as a whole have gotten maybe worse because we're not dealing with it? Because right early on it was like, hey, I got to deal with this, but now it's
Hmm.
kind of like I got to just live my life and let's,
Hmm.
forget about dealing with this, forget about, the COVID-15, putting on weight, not eating healthy, all that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. And so what are you seeing from those kind of macro
Yeah, so
standpoints?
it's very true that when this started, there was a lot of adrenaline around, this completely new experience, and there was a lot of rallying kind of that went on, like the we can do this and we got this. And then I definitely in my practice saw the point at which the adrenaline went away and the reality of it set in, and we didn't and then our bodies and our sort of collective beings sort of didn't have that surge of energy and kind of positivity around we can do this. What I will say from a macro level is that there's a very wide range of how the pandemic is affecting people. And here are some patterns and examples that I'm seeing. There are some people who are faring okay, not great. They miss, going to a restaurant and eating a meal with friends and family. They miss hugging their older, whether it's, parents, grandparents, relatives. They miss travel. But they're doing okay. And those people tend to be, for the adults, it tends to be people who could flexibly work from home. Like me, I'm a good example of somebody in this category. While I really miss being with my clients in my beautiful office space, my work lends itself well to virtual modality. So, I have had a lot of clients that I've actually never met in person that have started working with me in this past year. And we've done great work together and they've benefited, and it has been a positive experience. So I think people whose work has translated well, um, are kind of faring on the better end. Parents of, well, this is tricky. It's hard to generalize, but
Sure.
parents of kids who are older and can do things more independently, whether that means navigating their virtual learning or just even entertaining themselves while parents have to work. Those folks are also faring a little bit better. Folks who are really struggling that I'm seeing are parents of young children. We're talking about toddlers, preschoolers. Those are the kids where it is pretty much impossible to be on a computer doing some kind of virtual work and making sure that the toddler isn't setting the house on fire.
Sure.
Like, this is a real tension. And what that sometimes is looking like is parents are having to, be present with their kids as much as they can. But then when those kids are napping or in bed at night, then the parents are going kind of on a second shift to do the work that, needs to get done for the day. So those families are struggling more. And then I would say families where financial resources have been affected because there have been layoffs or shifts, not as many shifts to have access to that, that has been really difficult. I think also another factor is just the uncertainty.
Mhm.
We like to know what's coming. Most of us like to know what's going to happen, and there is zero certainty in a pandemic. And so I think there's a stress that's associated with
Mhm.
sort of like, okay, it's another day, it's another week. There really has been a time warp because
Sure.
some of the things that mark time also have looked different, like holiday celebrations and travel. So, some people are doing okay, and a lot of people aren't. And I think
Sure.
I think in my field, we're going to be dealing with sort of the after effects of this for a while,
Sure.
unfortunately.
No, I'm sure there's plenty of studies that you learned about in school and reference nowadays that talk about, again, people trying to do stuff in heightened stressful situations, and just the extra cortisol that, goes through people's bodies, and
Flowing.
just, and the, just how worse they are at different motor skills and stuff like that. So, unfortunately for a lot of families, a lot of people having to be at that heightened state, most days is,
Perpetually.
yeah, is not gonna be a great thing. When you're talking about the younger kids, it almost, again, don't have kids, so haven't had to go through this exactly, but have a pretty good idea. I'm the oldest of five, so I kind of have,
All
some
right.
ideas from that standpoint. But like, it almost sounds similar to having a newborn to a degree, where like you're right, because with a newborn, you're just all like, you're kind of
Consumed.
always consumed with them, and so trying to get other stuff done is very challenging. Where, again, as they get a little bit older, when you can send them to school or send them to daycare, or have somewhat of a system set up in place, it lets you kind of have that, schedule and structure to accomplish other things, that you're having to do. Where now, because that's gone, you're in that perpetual state of making sure that they're okay, and doing those kind of things. And so, again, that's obviously a stressful time for a lot of parents, is that first 12 to 18 months. And so to be doing that for a second time with the same kids for 12 months, would be challenging.
I think it is. I think it is. And I think there's just a lot to balance. Parents are trying to balance their work responsibilities. They're trying to balance their kids' needs. And some of the avenues that we would take advantage of aren't available, right? Like some of the social connection can't really happen in the same way, or even just, you know, going to the park or going to the playground, that's not necessarily super easy, right? There are
No,
things that, so even if we do go to the park or the playground, we have to have masks and we have to stay away from people, and it's just a challenge. It feels and looks and sounds different than what we're accustomed to. So,
sure. And it's, again, for a lot of people, it's harder to have grandpa and grandma take a look to watch the kids for an afternoon or for a day. Or, again, it's hard. We haven't been able to, in most people are social at some level, whether that's
mhm,
super social or not. And so, like, having that release of a way to, release the stress, and
right.
enjoy, and, kind of recharge your batteries, having those kind of things
There's no
taken away,
break.
was yeah, for me personally, it was more when my gym was closed, which initially you thought, okay,
Mhm.
for a couple of weeks, not, it won't be the worst thing ever. And then a couple of weeks turns into a couple of months, and it was like, okay, I need to figure something out, because this isn't sustainable. And so, fortunately, I was able to do that. But it's, again, a similar thing if you're used to hanging out with friends or hanging out with family, and suddenly that's kind of harder to do.
For sure. And I think that for parents, the not having access to childcare, to somebody else taking care of their kids for a little bit, to have that break and that recharge has been extremely challenging. And I really think about single parents. When you have a partner, there can be some tag teaming that can take place, but the single parents are out there and they are just, they're doing the very best that they can. But this is hard. This is
Sure.
definitely taking a toll for sure.
You mentioned, technology is, kind of a big or a hot topic for teachers and parents and stuff. So, like, from a parent standpoint, kind of what
Mhm.
are some of the, kind of main things that you kind of teach and coach, parents regarding technology and their kids, and everything that involves?
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite things to talk about, and I tell people in my class that I teach, um, that there was a selfish component of me doing all of the research that I did to create this class. I read a lot of books, I read a lot of articles, I did a lot of work to put it together, in part because my clients are struggling with these issues every day, but I'm also a mom having to make the very same decisions about what are going to be the standards and the rules and the expectations in our home. So it was kind of a two for one, right? A two for one effort. So I have a couple thoughts to share about that. The first is that I think it's really important when we talk about technology to have a really balanced view. So the analogy that I use in my class is, and again, this is when it was pre-pandemic. Now these classes are happening virtually, but I would say to people, how many of you came to this class tonight? How many of you drove here in a car? And everybody raises their hands. Okay, so that was super convenient that you didn't have to walk to my office, right? It got you here quickly and safely. But there's a trade-off. On the way, you polluted the environment a little bit, right? So there are the pros and the cons of, driving in your car. The same is true for technology. And I think sometimes parents have a tendency to get really negative and really critical. And they sometimes take the approach, the put them in a bubble approach, as I like to say, like, can we just put them in a bubble and like not deal with it, right? And I think that's a really short-sighted, ineffective kind of view. I think we need to acknowledge that there is so much benefit that we get from technology. I mean, us having this conversation right now is a perfect example, right? And there might be people that hear this today that take something away that's helpful to them, and they will have benefited from that technology, right? But there's also some downsides, and in regard to kids and healthy development, and we need to be thoughtful about that too. So I ask people to take sort of a balanced approach in thinking about it. I would say the second really important point that I want to make is that I would encourage parents and teachers too in their classrooms to think about the end goal being teaching tech management skills to the child, because that child is going to grow up, and one day that child is going to leave your classroom, your home, and they are going to have to be equipped with the skills inside of them internally. So I think another thing that happens around tech is parents get, with good intention, they get real set on restriction and boundaries and only this amount of tech time. And, you can't have this and you can't have that. And of course, there are developmental, considerations from littles to bigs, right? That this changes. But I'm trying to encourage parents to think more about, how do you build self-reflection? How do you build self-analysis? And how do you ultimately raise kids who have their own meters inside of them for making those decisions? Because you can't put them in a bubble. I mean, that's impossible, right? I mean, even just if we look at how much kids are having to do on technology for just their virtual learning alone, right? Can't do it. They wouldn't be able to do school if we took the bubble approach, right? So I try to get parents to think about, yes, kids need boundaries and limits, but are they part of the process of making them? Are they part of the negotiation of how those boundaries change as they get older? And are you raising kids who have the ability to recognize, oh man, I've been playing this video game for 45 minutes and I'm starting to get a headache. I think it's time for me to get up and go outside and, play with the dog or ride my bike or do something else. Again, that's an internal process that I think is really important to help our kids develop. So those are just a couple of pieces of insight into kind of how I approach the topic.
Very nice. Well, and like you're talking about technology today, we are lucky in the fact that with the pandemic and lockdown and things that is at this time, right? Because 10, 20 years ago, when we were locked at more people would have lost jobs because you couldn't do your job remotely.
For sure.
Two, we wouldn't be able to be as connected as we are today, right? Say we're able to do this, but again, I'm also able to jump on a video call with my parents who are in their 60s, which, right. Again, video calls that were happening were pretty poor 5-10 years ago, and they definitely weren't happening for the masses by any stretch of the imagination that way. So there's, again, not that it's a good thing that it's happened, but we're fortunate as far as when it's happened and what some of the big positives that technology has afforded us to try to keep our lives as normal as possible from that standpoint.
For sure.
Well, so we got a chance to talk about some good theories from that
Mhm.
standpoint for people who are looking for more practical advice for maybe their unique situations. What are some of the ways that people can get a hold of you?
Sure. So I have a website, which is there, www.drnatinsky.com. And there you can find out a little bit about the classes that I'm offering. I kind of change them out every semester. So you can, I see I'm still a perennial student. I still talk about semesters.
Semester.
Um, so that's one way. I also have a Facebook page where I also publicize classes and talks that I'm giving. And then I have a LinkedIn page as well. But really, my website is kind of the best place to go to see what's happening. And I should say that I support parents and teachers really in three different ways. I do one-on-one consultation, which is, personalized, and it is like therapy, but it is not therapy. It is more consultative. It's more a collaboration of a parent coming or a teacher coming and saying, these are the challenges that we're having, and me saying, this is some expertise and some knowledge that I have. Let's put the two together and make a plan that is going to move you towards your goals that you have, either for your family or for this student or for this classroom. So that's one-on-one consultation. And then I mentioned, of course, the classes and the workshops. And then the third thing is that I offer speaking engagements. And sometimes those are, a group of moms or dads in somebody's living room, pre-pandemic, of course. And then sometimes it's a PTA bringing me in to talk to a school community, church groups, neighborhood groups, philanthropy groups, kind of runs the gamut. But really, in essence, in all three of those modalities, I'm really sharing knowledge about the brain, about human development, and about how to build a really positive, emotionally connected relationship with the kids in your life.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. We'll definitely check her out. I appreciate you taking the time to jump on with me today.
I so
And
appreciate you having me. It's
yeah,
been
it
a
was a
delight.
very interesting conversation. So with that, though, we'll say goodbye to everyone. Have a good day.
Have a good one.